This is Brent. Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com. Well, Montana Dan, let me read this. I believe we're on question 237. Stansbury's Constitution, or Catechism on the Constitution of the United States. Questions and answers that the student learns. It is to be desired, question 237 out of 333, it is to be desired that Congress should always comply with the advice of the President. Is it to be desired that Congress should always comply with the advice of the President? Answer, no. For then his advice would in time come to have the authority of a command. It would be the President and not the Congress who would make the laws, and the liberty of the country would be in the greatest danger. There is no more dangerous despot than one who can make his will obeyed. Whoa. There is no more dangerous despot, that's despotic person, tyranny, tyrant, dictator, than one who can make his will obeyed and yet preserve the forms of a free government. Augustus Caesar, you heard of that galoot, haven't you? Caesar? No, he was the first really true emperor of the Roman Empire. You see, the Roman Empire for a few centuries, Rome founded 753 BC, and for a number of centuries, they existed under what they called the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic. They had a pretty good deal going. Got out of hand pretty quick, but they did try because they could see what things ought to be. Well, now keep in mind, Dan, I'm going to ask I hope you're listening because I want to ask you what you think about some of this. In the Greek world, and they're the ones that kind of invented the word republic and democracy, the words. Those two words meant pretty much the same thing to them, and by the way, they still do today. Both of them operate on what we call the majority principle. There's not a whit of difference between them. Republicanism, what is it? Majority rule. The only difference is, well, no, there's not much difference. The republicanism is where a majority of people in different places choose somebody to send to a body of legislators that rule by majority. So it's just all majority rule, you see. Democracy is where just all the people decide by majority what will be done. Republicanism, a republic, is where the people by majority choose who will go to another majority of a legislature and decide what will be done. Is there much difference? No, not much difference. It's majority rule. And both of them are exceedingly dangerous. That's why we don't want the Congress of the United States or the legislature in your state to be sovereign. We don't want that. No. If they're sovereign, that means that they combine their will into one, pass legislation, and everybody has to obey. That's not freedom, friends. In England, they say, get this, Dan, in England, they say that Parliament, the national legislature, when it passes legislation, is acting in sovereignty. Sovereignty. The crown is not sovereign. The crown is the keeper of the sovereignty of the nation. And whenever Parliament opens, the king or the queen goes to Parliament, and they're part of Parliament, by the way, a component of Parliament, and they hand sovereignty over. They're the keeper of sovereignty, and that person hands sovereignty over by symbolic act to Parliament. So Parliament has the sovereign power to legislate, and whatever Parliament says, they say. It's final. Now, in practice in England, it's not true. It's never been true, and it still isn't. They're a common law country. Even though they say that, it's just flat not true. Why? Because the courts can overrule or modify an act of Parliament. But they don't say that. They just do it. Kind of funny, isn't it? Here in America, we just say it. We say, no, the Congress of the United States does not rule does not tell the Supreme Court what to do, and vice versa. And the president doesn't tell either one of them what to do, and neither one of them tell the president what to do. Oh, they can suggest, sometimes they can agree, that's okay. But all of them are to exercise independent judgment about what is final and what is law. Our common law government, recognizing, as do the 39 Articles of the Church of England, as I mentioned a while ago, recognizing the total depravity of the human heart, the darkness of the human heart, our common law government pits evil men in government, and that's the only kind there are. If you're looking for a good man, you're not going to find one. Of course, here in this analogy, there's a good man, but that's not what I'm just using this as an analogy, and an analogy breaks down eventually at some point, and this analogy breaks down too. But when you look at Congress and the president and the Supreme Court, it's a never-ending jockeying for position while they defend their own territory and try to encroach upon the territory of the other two and take control of the government. That's what's going on, and it never stops. And we don't want it to stop. We don't want them to agree. If they ever agree, I mean totally agree, then you have total government, solidarity, and you have tyranny. And every government in the world is that way, ruled by a single will, whether it be a single will of the Supreme Court. In our case, the danger is a single will of the Supreme Court, a single will of a president, or a single will of a legislature or Congress. Remember Roosevelt, what a classic example. He wanted to make America a communist nation. He had the Congress of the United States in his hip pocket. They rubber stamped everything he said. But he didn't have the Supreme Court of the United States. So he said, I got to have them or I can't be dictator. I'll rule by a single will. And so he came up with a plan. He told his henchmen, figure out a plan where I get control of the Supreme Court and they will do my bidding and support my New Deal. And so they said, well, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't appoint more justices. We've got 9 now. Once you make it 14, you can appoint the ones you want, and then they'll go your way. And then we had the switch in time that saved 9 justices. The switch in time, Justice Jackson. Justice Jackson went from the conservative side, opposing Roosevelt, to supporting Roosevelt's communism, socialism. No difference between those two. Just one word sounds softer. It isn't. Government taking control of everything and rule by a single will. Communism, just another label for the evil empire, the law of the city. They're all the same. Griffin calls it collectivism. It's always the same, ruled by a single will. A dictatorship like Nazism, a dictatorship like the USSR was and still is to a great degree. You don't think Putin doesn't run everything? No, you don't oppose him. Or the party boss in China, or the dictator of North Korea. It's all the same, ruled by a single will. Dan, you still there?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. You're in the state legislature. Did you see this play out? Was there a constant tension between the governor, the executive, the legislative, the state legislature, and the courts? And does that continue, or do you want to modify what I've said?
No, I think it continues. It in my opinion, both state and federal, the legislative body has given up a lot of their turf, if that's fair.
Yeah.
I guess one example is what should our federal judiciary be dealing with? And they have volumes and volumes of stuff that they rule on, and they're pretty limited by the Constitution.
Uh-huh. And we have, for example, now, on the national level, and I'm speaking to a wide audience from different states, but in your state, it's the same thing. The governor is the chief executive, like the president is the chief executive in his jurisdiction. But right now, people are aware all over the world of President Trump. Now, if you watch President Trump and watch what he does, he's pushing as hard as he can to take control. He's pushing as hard as he can to take control. Is that right that he does that? It's just the way things are, friends. It's just the way things are, and our common law tradition recognizes that. The Congress of the United States are doing all they can to maintain control. And the Supreme Court and the courts themselves, right down to the district courts, are doing all they can, some of them, to stop Trump. You see the battle. Do you see the potential three-way Mexican standoff? There are those in Congress that want Congress to oppose President Trump as much as possible. Who's right? Who gets to have the final word in America on these pressing questions of national survival? And the answer is, watch this, the final court of last resort, from whose decision there is no appeal if it's done right, is the jury, the 12-man jury. That's it in our common law tradition. And we're one of the few countries that are a common law country, and we even use the 12-man jury. In England, they've done away with 12-man jury except in criminal cases. They've done away with the grand jury, I believe 1935, 1930, mid-30s, England did away with the grand jury. We still use the grand jury at the federal level and the state level. That's an important component of our common law tradition too. It doesn't exist in the rest of the world. The law of the land uses it, the law of the city, the Roman law, the canon civil laws of Rome have no such thing. Why? Because the law of the city is fundamentally a martial kind of law. Admiralty law, martial law, administrative law. And the code of Justinian of the Roman Empire is the canon law of the Church of Rome and the Eastern Church. Is it to be desired that Congress should always comply with the advice? No. Question 238. Suppose some very important matter should happen while Congress is not in meeting. Can the president call them together? Answer. What do you think? Yes. If some important thing happens, like the bombing of Pearl Harbor, to talk about an obvious one, the President of the United States has the power to compel Congress to come into joint session. Just recently, I heard Montana Dan, if you remember this or have seen it in the news, tell me. I believe, didn't Trump send U.S. Marshals into Texas to try to find some congressmen that refused to come to Congress because they knew their vote? I don't remember what it was, but didn't he do that? Somebody tell me. Do you remember, Miss Francine?
Well, I think, yeah, the governor did.
Oh, the governor of Texas? Oh, the governor of Texas then, the executive, and this is the example, he sent his rangers or somebody out to find these state legislators because they refused to come in. The President of the United States has raw physical power. According to our Constitution of the United States, he's given that authority to compel Congress to meet. He does not have authority to compel them to do a certain thing or to vote a certain way. But he does have authority to compel them to meet and take a vote. Oh yeah, under certain circumstances. That's what he's talking about here. Dan, did that ever happen? Did the governor of Montana ever have to do that when you were in State House?
No, we didn't.
You've heard of such a thing, though.
Yes. Every once in a while, the legislature gets out of hand, and I think in Texas, they were in cooperation with the governor of the legislature for the redistricting votes.
Uh-huh. You know, Abe Lincoln, he wasn't above doing stuff like that. I'll tell you, it's an all-out war between the branches of government, and there's no real penalty, criminal penalty behind most of it. It's just a matter of whatever you can get away with. It's a three-way Mexican standoff, friends. And the Illinois legislature, back in when Abe Lincoln was in the Illinois legislature, him and half a dozen others, maybe 3 or 4, I don't remember, they didn't want their vote to be recorded, and they jumped out of the window. The governor had the doors blocked off with some kind of Capitol Police, and so they just jumped out the window. Yeah, they didn't want to be there for that vote. Well, that's our common law government. It's an adversarial tradition, friends. It's rough and tumble. Rough. Say, well, they can't do that. Oh, yes, they can. They can do it. Those folk in government can do a lot of things. The President of the United States has no jurisdiction. That Congress follow their own rules. The Supreme Court of the United States has no jurisdiction to force Congress to do anything. Now, congressmen and Congress may be acting like a bunch of jerks and doing things they hadn't ought to do, but inside that house where they meet, that's their jurisdiction. The President of the United States and Congress doesn't even come in there, can't even come in there. They have men that will stop him from coming in there. Master at arms, they call him. Arms, yeah, that means weapons. And he has men that work for him. Congress, that's their bailiwick. And they invite the president to come in. When they invite him to come in, yeah, he comes in, makes the State of the Union address, that kind of thing. But neither does Congress have any authority to boss the president, to commandeer the president. And by the way, in our American common law tradition, the employees and office holders of the general government in Washington, D.C. don't have any authority to commandeer anybody in the state government, including your local sheriff. That's Prince versus who? The United States? Well, it's the Prince case, of which Prince was governor, no sheriff. In Montana, Dan, in Montana, I'm talking to Dan, and Sheriff Mack was sheriff in, was it New Mexico or Arizona? I don't remember, Grant County. It doesn't make much difference. Fact is, they said, you can't tell us what to do. You can't commandeer us under threat of grand jury indictment, and that's what the federal government was doing. They tried to commandeer over 3,000 sheriffs in America. Said, you enforce the Brady Act or we'll come after you criminally. Only 2 out of over 3,000 took them to the mat, and one, by the way, went to the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court ruled and said, the President of the United States, the general government in Washington, D.C., has no authority to commandeer using U.S. Marshals, the IRS, the FBI, the CIA, any of those alphabet soup bureaucracies to commandeer a sheriff or anybody else who gets a paycheck from state government. Let me ask you a question, Dan. Are you there, Dan? I assume you are. I know you got to leave at some point and go to church. Dan go to church locally. He's been doing it for decades, but he's still there, I think. I hear him.
I'm here.
Well, if the Supreme Court of the United States makes a ruling, how much power, I mean raw force, if any, does the Supreme Court of the United States have to enforce their ruling, their finding? What would you say, Dan?
Well, as I understand it, they have to abide by the Constitution and a lot of their rulings are unconstitutional. So, especially if it's unconstitutional, zero. And as I understand it, we the people are above all of that. We just have delegated some of our some of our power to the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative branches.
Well,
But only that what's delegated.
the Supreme Court of the United States, I like to say they don't have any power, they just have authority. And they depend entirely upon the president to enforce their findings and their rulings. They don't have any Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, CIA, FBI, ATF, NSA. They don't have any of that. They just got black robes and they're supposed to look smart. But they're falling down even at that. At this point, they just look like bozos silliness. And even the Supreme Court justices are saying that of each other now. And rightly so, because some of it's just silly. But they don't have any raw power outside of trying to get the U.S. Marshals to do what they tell them to do in individual cases. Now, just like the courts in Montana, Dan, in a particular case, they make a ruling, they can enforce that case. But the courts don't have authority to just enforce their ruling all over the country. And the President of the United States doesn't have any obligation to command his U.S. Marshals, and he's in command of them, and not to mention the FBI and all those now millions of people under his command, not to mention the armed forces of the United States. He commands them all. He has raw power, lots of it. Supreme Court has authority. They do have power if they can get the U.S. Marshals to enforce their individual rulings in individual cases. See, that was a big problem, Dan. Remember, DJ Trump was, he was doing things with immigrants that the Supreme Court, one Supreme Court, or maybe two or three, I don't remember, local courts, district courts said, you can't do that, and we're going to enforce this injunction all over the United States. And DJ said, no, that ain't going to happen. Number one, you don't have the power to enforce the injunction. I'm in control of the U.S. Marshals that you use to enforce your injunctions. You can enforce your injunction in your case, but you cannot enforce the injunction nationwide. And the U.S. Marshals are going to have to make a choice here. Are they going to obey me or obey you? Well, where does their paycheck come from? DJ Trump signs their paycheck every 2 weeks, or however often they get it. If he doesn't sign off on it, they don't get it. Who are they going to obey? That's pretty easy, isn't it? We hope. Yes. Now, if the Supreme Court can't get the marshals to obey him, he has what does he have left? He's got the militia locally. He does have the authority to assemble the militia, and if they don't assemble at his command, the local militia in the jurisdiction of the court, or any part of them, then the U.S. attorney might prosecute them criminally if the President of the United States allows it. You see, the President of the United States is in command of who the U.S. attorney is prosecuted too. Only the President of the United States really has any raw force. And only the governor in your state has a handle on some serious raw force in your state. What does the Congress have? They have the power, the authority of politics, and they have the authority of law and the power of politics. The president has power of politics and authority and power, but that doesn't mean that he's at liberty to do any blasted thing he wants. No, this document called the Constitution of the United States limits him, just like, Dan, you got a constitution in Montana, don't you? I think Dan shuts off his mic so he's got family around him and he doesn't make a lot of noise. But the President of the United States and the governor of your state have a lot of power at their disposal. That's why the office is dangerous. And that's why politics is so important, because political clout and the people of the United States that support the president have great influence. There's one thing a politician wants more, whether it's the president, the governor, the state legislature leader, or the congressman, there's one thing they want pretty near more than anything else. They want to be loved and liked. They do. I'm telling you, friends, that's what they live for. If they can't get a majority of the people to love them and like them, then they won't stay in office. They won't get in office to start with, and they won't stay in office. It's a popularity contest. Well, it's not true love. It's just, what can you do for me today? But that's the political element of government. Our courts are not under that. The appointments to the courts are for life in the federal court system. And the appointments to courts in our states are different in each state, but still, they're subject to impeachment. But they're not supposed to be, in our common law tradition, subject to the popular will. The courts are to be of utter independent judgment, utter independent of political force, political influence. We call them the most independent branch of government, but the others are just as independent. Well, that's the Mexican standoff. I don't want you to forget that. Everything flows out of that separate and co-equal branch of government idea. Montana, Dan, I'm going to go to a song if you're still there. I know you have to leave at some point. Miss Frank? Okay. He's got to hustle and get there. And old Monty, I know where he goes to church. I've been there. Had the same preacher there for a long time. Nice fellow. Been faithful for a lot of years, teaches the Bible. Educated in Indiana, by the way, but he's from Montana. I know where he went to school. Winona Lake, Indiana. Sound like kind of like Lake Wobegon, but it's not. This is Brent. Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com.